Kathrine, I'm glad we had a little briefing before this, but I've never had anyone on the podcast that was also a newsie like myself. So I'm so excited to bring you on and chat all things camera confidence and skill set for interviewing and all of that. But can you just tell me a little bit about, I guess, your experience in news and now working for more of the PR firm and doing talent management and things of that nature?
Yeah, it's been an interesting trajectory. I started out, actually, I was in sports for several years. I started out doing that in Memphis, and then moved to Cincinnati for that job, and covered sports here for years. And it's funny, as good, well, in the last couple of years, as good as the Bengals have been, I did not cover them during any of those times. They were awful during the times that I covered them, but I loved it anyway. But I'd spent a couple of years in sports here, and the beauty of sports is that it's very predictable. The seasons, like, you literally get a list of the stories you're going to do, right? The schedule is the stories you're going to do. But I had gotten married and I wanted to have kids, and I didn't want to work nights and weekends anymore. So I picked the second worst shift in all of news, which is early mornings. But I loved it. And I think that's where I felt most comfortable, not as much the waking up part at 1:30 in the morning, but that just kind of conversational, easy feel to a morning show. And so I did that for many, many years. And then from there, after working in local news, I moved to the daily paper here in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Enquirer, where I was able to do Facebook Lives for them for 3 years. And it was really interesting because they were moving. Obviously, everything's online now. A newspaper is not a newspaper anymore. It's a digital outlet. And they wanted a way to kind of bridge the gap between what was on the website and where people were, which at the time was Facebook and Instagram. And so that's what I did. And it was awesome. It was great to be able to tell the stories of these incredible journalists who do this day in, day out. And I was able to take their information and give it to a whole new audience. And so that was what was amazing about that. And then after that, moved on to what some people might call the dark side, but I'm telling you, I think it's the bright side. And that is the world of public relations. And that's where I am now, mainly in media relations for Game Day Communications here in Cincinnati.
Cool. I know several news directors in Cincinnati, so we'll have to connect. Again, I've just been nerding out now. We were talking about how so many people that we, knew in TV are either in PR or doing something totally different. And I know you mentioned, similar to me, that you were also fired, which I think is so funny. For what? I just have to know.
So that's a great question. I still don't know. No, it was a hugely public firing too. Came out of absolutely nowhere. And this is the craziest thing was my co-anchor had been fired about 8 months prior. And I thought, well, I'm safe. Like, they can't fire me. I'm the only one left. I was wrong. I was 100% wrong. And so, I was in the middle of a contract. It was crazy, but it has turned out, and I want to be very clear. I hold grudges. I will never give them the credit for this, but I am so grateful that it happened. My life has opened up in a way, and the things that I'm able to do, the hours that I'm sleeping, like just little things, it just truly makes a huge difference. And so I am very grateful to be where I am right now, even if it did involve being publicly fired.
It's so funny you say that, because mine wasn't public and I was also in the middle of a contract. And what happened with me was, I was going from a very small market to Cleveland, actually. And going from, 109 to 17 was a very big jump. I was 26 and I was promised to be on the I team. And then the news director left before I got there. And so ultimately I was doing really riveting stories at soup kitchens and whatnot. Right? So you know how it goes. But ultimately I don't really know the reason either. So I think that's funny. And I'm like you too. I'm very thankful that it was a year after I had been fired that my old producer called me and said, "Hey, you're up for an Emmy. Do you want to enter? Because I know they're not going to tell you." And I was like, validation, So that's so funny. But anyway, I do want to chat about camera confidence a little bit, right? Because you and I have a lot of on-air experience and you are still very much involved, and I am in a very different way still involved. But I work with, like I told you, all these health and fitness coaches, and while they're very comfortable in front of their clients and in the gym and whatever else, It's a different story when they put their phone up to their face or
Yeah.
whatever and try to record a podcast, talk on their stories, and just market themselves. It feels awkward. And so I would love to know, and I know we're going to pick this apart, but when you get either somebody that's very green and they're
Mhm.
just not ready, they're not polished, how do you first start and assess their talent and kind of give them that confidence to show up on camera?
The first thing I'll tell you, it's the first rule in all of television and all of public speaking, presenting, whatever it is, and it's be yourself. And I know that sounds so trite, but it's truly that. Like, I know that if you take it in TV terms, the anchors that and the reporters that we feel like are the best and that we kind of understand and have that relationship with through a television screen are the ones that are not pretending to be an anchor or pretending to be a reporter or have that reporter voice like, you see on the movies. They're just being, they are just themselves, but like I like to say, an elevated version of themselves. So like presentation mode is where I like to put it. So you're not going to be talking to the camera in this case the way you would be to your best friend, but you're also not going to be giving it a speech the way you might to a crowd of thousands. So what I always tell people is be the best version of yourself. And this goes for whether it's a social media live, whether it's a podcast like this, whether it's a on air situation, a presentation, even if it's an in-person thing. If you are yourself, and again, just the best version of yourself, that's where you want to be. And any more than that, like, you don't want to try to be someone else. You got to be as true to yourself as possible, because that's going to come across. What I always caution, especially our clients and things like that, when they are, preparing for a TV appearance, for example, I'm like, don't try to memorize whatever it is you're going to say, because your quest to be so perfect and have every little nugget of information exactly right makes it sound like you don't care what you're saying and you're dispassionate, and it actually has the opposite effect. So being a little bit more real and preparing a little less and saying every once in a while, maybe not on purpose but accidentally, it's okay. And that's really the thing to remember.
You mentioned that, like, being a little unpolished. Now, that's going to be different on TV
Mhm.
versus a podcast, right? Like, there is a different level there. And there's also a different level being a guest on TV versus being the anchor
Oh
on,
yeah.
right? And so when I'm talking to my clients, it's funny you mentioned not really having a script. And I love that, because I even think back, okay, to TV days where when I was very, very green, I thought that I needed to memorize my live before I
Mhm.
went live. And every time I tripped over it, every time,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
want to get something. Whereas, I think about my podcast today, just to relate it to something that makes sense for the audience. But some clients will say, do I need to have, everything typed out? And I'm like,
Mhm.
absolutely not. Have a few bullet points that you can,
Sure.
blabber on about whatever. But ultimately, it's going to be so much more just unscripted and relatable when there isn't a script. Same thing when I record reels, right? I might
Mhm.
have just a headline that triggers a thought in my brain, but absolutely not. And not to mention, that's really not scalable if you're trying to script every piece of content you're doing.
No. And it's also you're right, it's time consuming and it has the opposite effect. And for people and again in TV terms, the version of polish sitting in an anchor desk and the version of polish out in the field are two completely different things. And we're looking for more of that kind of real ad-libbed version. And the beauty of that is that's what's most accessible to most people. The ability to read from a teleprompter, even though that sounds very simple, you can tell when people don't do it well. And you don't have to worry about that part. It doesn't have to be that scripted. Just, reveal what it is you want the person on the other end to know. And I think that a lot of that has to do with practice and repetition. I'm a person who I talk to myself all the time. I talk to myself in the mirror. I talk to myself in the car. I think this makes a difference. Like if I'm going to have a big interview or a big meeting or whatever, and I want to make sure I'm going to say the things right. Instead of memorizing it, I just practice saying it over and over. That's the way my brain works. If your brain works by maybe writing it down might help. However your brain works, that's really a really interesting way to figure out how best to kind of implant that information in your brain so that you can get it out to the masses a little bit simpler.
So what about that barrier though with being perfect? Because so many of my clients or coaches I talk to, they tell me that, they haven't sold, they haven't talked, they haven't done whatever on their stories because they've deleted it so many times. Whereas, you're prepping somebody for an interview to kill it. They've got one shot. There's not going to
Yeah.
be two over. So this isn't live TV, and we're shooting for perfection, which really is more of a procrastination tool sometimes. So how do you kind of break that barrier? Because I agree with you, being yourself, it's not easy for everyone. They don't really know what that means. It's almost like as soon as that barrier comes up, which is the phone or the camera, they completely morph into like robot mode.
Right. And what I would say is this: I think that, first of all, we are all our own worst critic, and that is 100% true, no matter where we are. But I would imagine, especially in the health and fitness space, we're dealing with some perfectionists there. So I understand that this is how we all kind of think. What I will tell you is this: what the little imperfections that you're seeing on that reel, on that video, no one else is noticing. Literally no one else is noticing. I'll also say this: in 25 years of television, I don't think I ever did a show exactly right. There's not one single show where I'm like, I didn't say, I pronounced every word correctly. I hit every camera. I was on my mark the whole time. No, it didn't happen. And it's okay. It's okay, because no one is going to be perfect in that way. So I think that sometimes it's about, and listen, we're talking about fitness experts. It's about reps, right? You got to get those reps in. And sometimes even the most imperfect reps can produce the result that you want.
Well, taking our own advice is the hardest thing, Kathrine.
It is the hardest thing. And I understand that completely. Yeah. I'm sitting here going, I should have redone my hair as I'm saying, hey, everybody needs to be themselves. This is what happens.
Fix my hair a little bit. I keep staring at myself
Yeah.
on Zoom. Yeah. I get it. It's so funny. The only reason I have even the small amount of makeup on that I do right now is because I'm quite literally, as soon as we're done recording a month of reels. And so it's like, okay, the once every 2 times a month, I put some foundation on. But the other barrier I see is this fear that someone is going to judge them. And usually that's a family member, a friend, because I felt like this when I first left news. It took me over a year before I was able to say I was fired. I would say I was laid off, because they're the same freaking thing, realistically.
Yeah.
But, I was laid off, and I couldn't quite say that because I felt embarrassed. And then when somebody would meet me, a stranger, and ask me what I did, I would always say, I was a TV reporter and now, right? And because I was ashamed that happened. And so for me, it was very weird going from, my friends, oh, Taylor's the one on TV and she's the fit friend. And then I was like, just the fit friend. I didn't have a cool job anymore, right? Now I think very differently. Of course, it's been almost 5 years, but how do you kind of overcome that barrier? And I know people don't have the same background as me, but they're just nervous.
Right. Well, I think that there's a couple of things at play there, and I understand completely. Like in 5th grade, I decided that this is what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to be on TV. And it's funny because I just found this the other day, sitting here on my desk. This is my high school. Seriously, this is my high school newspaper. Look how yellow it is. It tells you how old I am. But I write about, being a female sports reporter, and that's what I wanted to be. So this is this is always who I was. So when that was taken away, it's like, well, now what am I now? Right. So that's one side of that imposter syndrome. The other part of it is the fear of what other people are going to say. And I think that, number one, the toxic nature of television actually prepared us very well for this, right? Like, how many times have I been told your hair looks like crap, or you're too fat, or, whatever it is, how many babies you're going to have? Are there 3 of them in there? It's like, no, just the one. It's hard being pregnant on TV, all of those things. And so having that background, I don't, criticism to me is different than criticism to others. But what I will say, for those people having trouble with it, is this, and I'm not the person who came up with this. One of the 4,000 podcasts that I've listened to in business came up with this. But essentially, all you have to be is 10% better than the person you're teaching. That's it. So here I was, I left television. I had 12,000 hours of experience on television. And as I started my business doing camera consultations and teaching people how to be confident on camera, I thought, well, do I really know what I'm talking about? I had all this time. all this experience. And I was like, wait a minute. And I sat back and I thought about it, and I'm like, some people may make fun of it. Some of my former coworkers may think I'm ridiculous or desperate or whatever. I don't care. Like I literally don't care. And I don't know when that happened. I don't know if it was being fired. I don't know if it was turning 40. I've also had cancer twice. So I'm like, I don't care what any of y'all think. Like, I'm going to do what I want. And so I think that once I had that mindset, I didn't care what they thought. And it has been successful. And I have been successful as a result of the relationships I made and the lessons that I learned that I'm teaching other people now. But if that concern is there for you, understand that if someone makes fun of you, that is as much about them as it is about you. Your people are not going to make fun of you. And if they are, let them do it, because that to me reveals an issue in their personality and in their situation, and not in you.
Well, now I want to take just a really weird turn and talk about criticism in TV, because I think that it might be entertaining for some people to listen to. And I have to share a story with you, and I want to know what you've heard. So I don't know what it was like going to your college, but I remember there was a professor at Mizzou where he was very well known that he did not give anything higher than a C. And as somebody who had above a 4.0 all the time, because I'm one of those people, I was like, challenge accepted. I think I got a B minus, but regardless, he would bring a box of tissue, because this was also the class where you first went live.
Okay.
And so he would bring a box of tissue to the lab and he would chew you apart. And I was always the only one that didn't cry.
That's impressive.
I was like, don't cry, don't show weakness, don't show weakness. And so I remember that. And then, maybe it was like this for you, but they basically drilled it in your head in school that you were going to have no money and that you were doing it for the greater good of society. So get used to making no money. So when I graduated with a master's degree, making $30K a year, I was like, yeah, this checks.
Yeah. Yeah.
10 days in a row, no weekends. But I want to know if you had before we dive into like our criticisms from, asshole viewers, I would love to know how they prepared you for just how ruthless it was going to be.
I don't think I was prepared for how ruthless it was going to be. And honestly, and again, I'm of a certain age. And so understand that to criticize someone back then, someone had to pick up a telephone, call the station, ask for your desk, and be transferred there. Like, that's a lot of steps to still want to criticize someone on their choice of dress or whatever. And you're like, okay, so you knew when you came off the set and that your message light was blinking, you're like, here we go. I've gotten actual mailed letters, worried about my health because I'm so heavy, or like how terrible my hair is, and whatever it might be, anytime you do anything in television, you're going to get criticized for it. And again, I think that because this was my first big girl job, right? I mean, I graduated from college and 6 months later I was working in a newsroom, and this is just how it was. This is just how, this is how my entire adult life was. It's not supposed to be like this. You're not supposed to be criticized, or people aren't supposed to be yelling at you from across the newsroom and things like that. That's not the way a normal place of business operates. But yeah, like I said, I think that, compliments were sometimes backhanded. My favorite was, oh, you look so much skinnier in person. And you're like, well, thank you. Thanks so much. I don't know. I'm not a tall person at all there. And it would always be like, oh my God, you're so short. I am so short. Thank you. I mean, but what is the appropriate response to that? Like, even when what I finally decided was, if they mean it well, I'm taking it well. So if they said you're so much skinnier in person, they mean you look skinnier than I thought you were. I'm taking it as a compliment. I'm just going to say thank you and move on. But, it's tough sometimes.
That's so funny. And, we still would get phone calls, but it would typically not go past the desk. But we would get the live comments as the news.
Oh, yeah. Well, the advent of social media made everything different. I mean, because anybody can hide behind an avatar and say whatever they want.
Right, exactly. I remember I had this girl, her name was actually Karen, who would just quite literally comment how awful my eyelashes were on a weekly basis. a weekly basis. I had a man by the name of Dan who constantly told me that I needed more necklaces because he got tired of seeing the same one. I know, like weird ones, right? And then my favorite, which I didn't know until actually a current client found this, and I had never seen it, but somebody in Cleveland. So my background is I was a competitive powerlifter and bodybuilder. And that was kind of my identity at my station because no one else, you know how unhealthy reporters are.
Oh, it's terrible. It's
Oh
terrible.
God. Like
It's there's no vegetables. Like there nary a vegetable shall be seen in a newsroom.
strictly coffee, strictly
Yeah.
caffeine, you know, and
Pizza.
adrenaline and anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember someone showed me this Reddit thread that somebody started about, is this reporter in Cleveland on steroids? And I thought that was hilarious. But anyway, it was always the outfit or the dress or whatever, because I was a repeat outfit person. I didn't care. When you don't make much money, I was buying stuff on I would go to the Macy's backstage and
Oh
buy
yeah.
the homecoming dresses on sale and just snag a bunch. And then, we're always in the elements and whatnot. So I just think that's so funny to bring up because, we have such a different perspective. I have clients that are worried about what their, random person from high school is going to think, and I'm like, God, I have been criticized so much, I really don't care. And I really think once I left TV, getting fired because that was so out of character for anything that I thought would ever happen to me, that I just said, F it, I'm starting a business. I cried for about 30 minutes in my car, and then I was like, wait a second, F this, I'm gone. So
well, but you bring up a really good point. The criticism wasn't just coming from the public, it was coming from inside the house. Like newsrooms are built on making you feel like oh, you're lucky to be here, and you could be gone at any moment. And then periodically they'd bring in consultants whose job it was to tell you how terrible that you were so that they could change things to justify how much they were being spent or being paid by the newsroom so that the ratings would go up, So, I mean, it's a very, still to this day, a very toxic environment. And it's unfortunate because it is also a necessary, local news is the backbone of storytelling in this country, and the way it's going, and the fact that when I started in television, those many years ago, starting salary was $36,000, and right now at the same station it's 43. That's not right. That's not right. That is not there's no way you're going to bring the talent and the passion that we had 25, 30 years ago. There's no way these kids who are coming out of college are going to continue at it for 25 years. I worry about where journalism's going. Is the short end of that statement is, where is it going?
Oh, me too. And again, that's a podcast in and of itself. And I think all of my clients would be like, all right, Taeler, there she goes on her TV tangents again. But it's just interesting to hear this from you because like I said, I haven't interviewed anybody that shares those sentiments. And so it's one, it's validating, but two, the outside looking in is like, wow, you're on TV. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm. And it is cool.
It is cool. And it is. And again, I want to say there's so many stories that I know changed so many lives, but at what cost to my mental health and sanity, right? That's kind of what it comes down to. So now I want to pivot a little bit to a few of the tactical things, which is more of the storytelling component and the writing style and whatnot. So let's say that, I mean, I feel like written and verbal is fairly interchangeable for a conversation today. But I've got a lot of clients, coaches I talk to that, can explain something very well, but the second they go to type it out, right, it just feels like a textbook. It feels robotic and very vague, right? And how do you potentially coach somebody to implement some storytelling in there and to add sentence variety?
So I think that the easiest way to say it is write like you talk. In the same way that you might say, you're not going to start a conversation with somebody about a game last night going, it took till the final 30 seconds of the game before the Bengals finally. No, you would say, oh my gosh, did you see the end of that game? Not that you're going to write that as your headline or as your lead, but at the same time, you write like you talk. And that goes just mean that just means talk conversationally, write conversationally. And I have two kids right now. One is a senior in high school. I have two kids all the time, but like right now, they're a senior in high school and a junior and a sophomore in college. And the things that they're writing are reports and, you know, these long essays. And I'm like, that's awesome, but don't write an article like you would write an essay, right? That's not a skill. Those are not the same in any way. What you, in many cases, want to do is write shorter, because we all have shorter attention spans, and write in shorter sentences, like the long, you know, flowery sentences we learn to write in book reports and in essays and all of those things. That's not really, especially for blog posts and even like a written article, those are not what we want to do. We want subject, verb, predicate, very simple sentences, but interesting. And you mentioned a good point about varying sentence length. If you read them, and I always read them out loud, even though you're reading them in print, I think that really helped you understand, oh, wait, this needs a little bit more here, or I maybe need to take a little away there, or that sentence is way too long. Let me fix that real quick. But I think, again, it all goes back to just being conversational.
I agree. And when you're entering a space like the health and fitness space, which is extremely saturated, and you want somebody to stop on your Instagram post, you know, you mentioned, oh my gosh, did you see the game last night or whatever, right? To be
Right.
honest, I would probably put that as a headline in a caption,
Yeah.
right? Not an article or a blog post, but for an Instagram caption, when I coach my clients to write, you know, lead sentences, I'm essentially telling them, and I'm sure we agree on this, that's the last thing I typically write. Get everything else first.
Yeah.
And then I find the one sentence that kind of makes me scratch my head. And I typically play off of that for the lead sentence, right?
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about Instagram, that hook is so important, because it's such a visual medium. I'm going to stop at a photo, but if the first line before those little dots come on, if that's interesting, I'm like, okay, I'm in. And even if it is too long, I might even stay a little bit longer if that hook is there. And I think that's a really important thing. That's another, you know, TV thing that isn't necessarily always there in the written word, but is in the visual medium. But I think that's one of those things, that hook can really, what did Blues Traveler say? The hook can bring you back. That's exactly what it is. You get somebody hooked immediately and they're going to keep reading.
Well, I think the misconception is that people don't read anymore. And
Yeah.
it's not that they don't read anymore, but I do believe that people's attention spans are consistently getting shorter. And
Oh, yeah.
it's just harder to get somebody to look, right? We're constantly, you know, looking at notifications, being drawn here, being drawn there, right? Like, think about how many times you go to do something on your phone and then you get distracted by an app or something
Oh,
else.
yeah.
Right. So I'm just curious to know how you think about that, because that's always a challenge, is just implementing storytelling. And
Mhm.
I really do think the best tip is truly reading it out loud, because when you
Yeah.
hear yourself, you're immediately going to say, why does this sound like an AP English essay?
Why is it clunky?
Or
Yeah.
right. Or okay. Or if you're like having to take a lot of breaths because your sentences are too long, right?
It
Or
kind
if
of
you
tells
start
you. Yeah.
every sentence with the same word, like, just add
Yes.
variety. And it's funny because, you know, my clients will say, well, you know, I don't have 10 years of writing experience or whatever. And it's like, it's yes, that helps. I agree. I've always really liked writing, which is probably why
Mhm.
we both were journalists.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you have to understand how to sell your framework, right? And so I know you didn't sign up as a coach to be a writer, but that's part of running your business. You have to market it. And I think that people really underestimate how important and how much time really needs to be spent on really developing your voice, not just your verbal, but
Absolutely. And if you can carry on a conversation at a party, you can write an Instagram caption. That's the bottom line. If you can be interesting enough for people to ask questions and to ask them questions, you can do it. The other part of it is, and this is the flip side of the coin, that sometimes if it feels too daunting, don't overthink it and just put something out there. Because sometimes, again, go back to the repetition. The more you do it, the easier it'll get. And sometimes it's literally about storytelling, a story that relates to that photo or relates to whatever, you know, national day of the week it is, or whatever it is, something that's personal. That, look, Baptist preachers have been using this trick for our entire lives, right? They start with a story and then they get it back to the scripture. That's exactly what you're doing with an Instagram caption in many cases.
I always, always, always tell my clients when they struggle with this, I always ask, what made you think of that idea? because you
Mhm.
didn't just think to write about eating more protein or overcoming PCOS symptoms. You literally thought about your friend, you, a lab you read, something like that, right? Storytelling doesn't have to be a diary entry. Storytelling
That's
can
right.
be 1 to 3 sentences just to set the tone to get me interested, right? Because saying something like how to eat more protein, I can find that on Google, right?
Yeah.
But telling me, I'm not even going to think of a great example right now, but just drawing me in with, I couldn't believe he said that at the gym the other day. Well, I want to know,
Right.
what did he say at the gym
What
the other
did
day?
he say? I
Yeah,
want to
what did
know.
what did he
Exactly.
say? So when it comes to, now I want to kind of move into the podcast arena or even YouTube, just the interviewing side of things, right? Because a lot of my clients are hosting guest interviews, and what's great about social media and podcasts and YouTube channels and stuff is that if you bring somebody on, you're obviously sharing audience space with them, right?
Mhm.
Chances are you're going to do a collaboration post or whatever. Their audience will see you and vice versa. So I think it's a great way to organically get some reach. And with that being said, I want the interview to be interesting because otherwise people won't listen to it. So
Right.
I would love to know a few tips that you might have on interviewing somebody that you've never met before, just making an interview interesting to listen to.
So the first thing is everyone likes to talk about themselves. So I think that the warm-up questions are super important, whether they're actually on the interview and the podcast, that sort of thing, or prior to it. And so sometimes that's just establishing, it's almost like shaking the rust off. Sometimes it gets each of you kind of, okay, this is how the cadence is going to go. But asking someone about themselves really allows them to talk about the thing that they're most familiar with, right? And who doesn't love talking about themselves? So that's number one. And then secondly, I always like a pre-show interview. Anytime I do I do a series of podcasts for different clients and things like that. And I do like a pre-show interview because sometimes like little nuggets will come up and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. And that might inform a series of questions you ask. But beyond that, the most important thing to do, it's twofold. Number one is know your audience. So if you are asking questions, I think every good message starts with the end, and that is who is receiving it. So if you know what audience is there, who is listening, ask the questions that audience wants to know. It really helps you decide what questions to ask, first of all. And second of all, it really helps make that conversation smoother and more conversational. And then secondly, besides knowing the audience, the key truly is listening. The best interviewers are also good listeners. You can't like have your list of questions and only like when that person ends, you're like, next question. You've got to listen because one of the things, again, not to keep going back to television, but toward the end of my time on TV, we started doing what's called MMJs, which is it's a multimedia journalist. So that meant you shot the video, you know what I'm talking about.
PTSD, the
Yes.
PTSD.
I know you had to light it. You had to ask the questions. I love doing interviews, but what I found is when I was so worried about, is the video white balanced and am I rolling or did I forget to hit? I was missing, when I would go back and log those interviews, I was missing questions I should have asked, but because I wasn't listening to the answers, I was so busy worrying about all these other things that I wasn't listening. And without listening, you cannot be a good interviewer. So kind of, in the same way that you want to prepare, you also want to allow for new questions that come up during the conversation.
I need a moment after that one. I don't think people understand. It's so right though. And I know we're obviously relating everything back to news because that's why we
Yeah.
know what we know.
Yeah.
But this MMJ, if you're listening to that thinking, what the hell is that? Why did Taeler have a panic attack? It's a multimedia journalist. And so in my first few stations, really every station other than Cleveland, which is how I thought, hey, look, Ma, I made it, was that I shot my own video, edited my own video,
Yep.
lit everything, booked my interviews, and I was turning 3 stories a day.
Yeah.
So, and then if breaking news came up, well, good luck, right? Plus, I was doing my own live shot. So if I was live on TV, there was nobody standing in front of me. If you're picturing this, it was a backpack connected to my camera, sending a nice signal to the station, praying that I could get it set up correctly. And so Yes, I agree. The equivalent to that in non-TV terms is, like you said, when you write that script and you stay to it, transparently with you today. And this is actually not what I normally do, but I didn't even prepare questions because I already knew based on your background that you and I would go in some direction that
Yeah.
was just fine. And normally, for people that were not on TV, which is everyone else I've ever interviewed, I do have categories, right? And I might share that with clients ahead of time, which is, a major no-no in journalism, right? Don't share your questions ahead of time so they're not pre-rehearsed. But I found that a lot of people I interview sometimes, they may not be as comfortable. And I want to make sure that the conversation is there. And so if you are not able to listen and adapt and pivot during an interview, that's a problem, right? Like you have to listen and pivot. And I think the interviews that whoever's listening to this, if you think about conversations and podcasts or whoever that you love to listen to, it's because you're laughing along, you're listening along, you kind of forget. It almost feels like we're in the car with you, right? And
Right.
when it feels so scripted and rigid, that's where it's not fun to listen to anymore.
Yeah. And that's an easy mistake to make. Again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, like I want to be so sure that I ask exactly the right questions. I'm going to write them down. I would just say anytime you approach an interview, approach it like it's a conversation. It is not a speech. It is not, it's a conversation. And so if you look at it that way, it makes it a little bit easier.
I agree. Are there any little tidbits that you may have? What about if you're interviewing somebody that is just really not giving you the meat that you want, right?
Yeah.
This makes me think of like city councilmen,
That's a toughie. And so I think what I would always try to do, and this is another reason that MMJing was difficult, is because you had to do so many jobs as well. Just being able to talk to somebody ahead of time just sometimes lowers that stress level, because sometimes I don't care if they're elected officials or if, you've done 1,000, Instagram lives. Sometimes you're nervous doing interviews, and just being able to go, okay, she seems nice, or he seems like he's not going to ask me some crazy questions. It might make everything a little bit easier. The other thing, when people are nervous about doing interviews, because I do a series of interviews for a podcast for an organization that includes sports tourism people throughout the country. They're really great at selling their city. And when you ask them about themselves, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about myself. I'm like, all right, let's talk about your city then. Tell me all about your city. And in the way of them talking about the thing that they're proud of, they're telling the story of how they helped their city through the sports tourism. So sometimes it's just an end around to kind of like ask them the same question, but ask it in a different way. And that's one of the things that I learned first and foremost, especially covering sports. A lot of athletes, even professional athletes, especially baseball players, they've never been interviewed. Minor league baseball does not get covered. High school baseball, in many cases, does not get covered. And some players go directly from the minors or from high school to minors to the big leagues. And they come into the big city and they're like, oh my gosh, there's all these interviews. There's all these people talking to me. You might have to ask the same question 3 or 4 times. If it's recorded, feel free to do that. If it's a podcast like this where you're not going to edit it down, maybe that makes it a little more difficult, but just rephrase the question a little bit to get the answer that you're looking for.
I think about your background in sports and dealing with people that had not been interviewed, a little more green, right? And then I think about doing investigations, and everyone that's talking to me does not want to talk to me. So
Yeah.
it's a different,
This is a different world than that. That is true.
Right. And I remember my warm-up question, my mic check question, which would just to be asked, like asking them what they had for breakfast that day or something like that. As simple as that is, obviously, if you know them a little bit more and they're not like a criminal or you're about to catch them for something really bad, you're probably gonna have better luck asking them something a little more personal. But ultimately, you and I even just chatted about our experience in TV before we got on here. And I was like, wait, you were fired? Okay, I was fired. I mean, that's silly, but ultimately, there has to be an icebreaker question. And my least favorite question ever that people try to do for that first question is saying something like, so tell me about your story.
Yeah, it's too broad. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Tell me about your story.
And
Yeah.
it's going to go on for 15 minutes,
Yeah.
right?
True.
So I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves. And I used to do that. I used to do that in TV, but in podcast world, because my brain was like, this is not TV, it's a different medium. So I have to just do different things, which was so stupid. But I listened to some old podcasts and I cringe, where now, sure, I might have you give a little background based on
Mhm.
context, but I'm recording an intro for all of my guests because
Yeah,
it makes it so much easier. And I can condense it in about a minute, right?
right.
Are there any other little tidbits about interviewing or anything that's kind of like a pet peeve? Like if you're watching another person doing an interview, you're listening, you're like, God, I wish that person
I,
was.
I'll tell you one thing, especially in video interviews like this, like Zoom interviews, I'm going to call them. It's when, and it's difficult, and you're going to have to keep convincing your brain what to do here. It's when people don't look at the camera. So like if I'm I'm looking at the camera right now, I'm looking at my laptop's camera. So it looks like I'm looking at you, Taeler. So like that's what I'm doing. I'm looking right at you. But if I were to really look at you and your image on my screen, this is what it looks like. This isn't wrong. And I'm trying my best here. I'm making eye contact with you, but I'm looking down. And so somebody watching this video, the whole idea is to make a connection with the person on the other end. And if I want people to listen to what I'm saying and believe what I'm saying and, take my advice, I need to make eye contact with them. And to do that, you got to actually look at the camera. Now, just like in real life, you don't want to stare somebody down and never look away, because that's super uncomfortable too. So it's okay to look down and look away and do all these things. But just keep referencing back to the camera lens itself. And so that goes for, it's really dramatic on a phone, I find, because depending on how you do it, like if your camera is way over on one side and you're looking at your image on the other, it can really be jarring. To that end, that's why vertical video in many cases, it kind of camouflages that a little bit. But if you're doing an interview like this, and look, it can be as simple as putting a post-it up here with an arrow saying, look here, dummy, right? Or anything like that. Just keep referencing back to the actual camera. That's one of my pet peeves. And also when people set up shots that look like this, like, it drives me crazy. I don't need to see your ceiling. Like, I really don't. I really don't. Just a little tiny bit of headroom is all you need. There
That's
you
such a good tip. That's honestly so great, because I don't feel like I do that sometimes. My laptop's like on a stand right now. Um,
Mhm.
that's such a great one, truly. Um, is there any are there any little nuances or phrases that drive you nuts?
Yes. Okay. So glad you asked. First of all, I have like a 2-page document of words that I can't stand. But that's another world entirely. But as far as things like, okay, so one of the things that I can't stand is when somebody is like doing an Instagram live or something like that. And they're like, I'm just hopping on here. Don't tell me that.
Oh,
Tell me you're hopping on anywhere. Or it's, I'll just wait for other people to hop on. I'm just gonna wait. Okay, no, don't wait. Don't wait. More people are probably going to watch your Instagram live as a replay. Don't wait for people to hop on, just get to it. And I think that goes back to like time is of the essence. Let's go. 20, you've got 20 seconds and then I'm done. I'm out of here. So don't waste that time. Time is precious. So yeah, I would say that. So look at the camera, the angles, that's another thing entirely. Sometimes like lighting's another one. I'm a huge fan of lighting, and the tip that I would tell you, the easiest thing I always say is Mother Nature's the greatest lighting director in all of the world. Just face a window. Like sometimes people are like, oh, I've got this great view behind me, let me turn my camera around, and so the window's behind me, and we know what happens. You look like you're in the witness protection program. So like in the room where I am right now, I don't have any windows, and so I have a light in front of me, and it's just always sitting there, and I turn it on when I need it and I turn it off when I don't. But lighting makes a big difference, because again, we want to make it easy for the person on the other end. The goal is just for them to hear what we're saying and take in our content and believe what we're saying, and whether it's do what we're asking them to do or believe us as an expert. And so whatever we can do to take away all the barriers to that, and that's audio, so that you don't need a mic necessarily. If you want to, that's great. If you want to use AirPods, that's great too. Lighting is a really key component of that. The level of your computer. So making sure you're looking not only at the camera lens, but that you're looking to like your eye level with the camera lens. You don't want to be looking down like, where you're essentially looking, the person on the other end is looking up your nose. So lighting, level, audio, all that good stuff.
those are great tips. I think they're also very simple too. And
Yeah.
What people really don't understand is they overcomplicate everything. We didn't even talk about equipment, but
Mhm.
it's not about the best mic or the best lighting. I mean, you can
No.
do literally so when I first started my podcast 4 years ago, it was, well, embarrassing, but I would record on my phone because
Oh
I
yeah.
was broke and I said whatever, you know? And was it perfect audio? No. Did I have the common sense not to have the AC running constantly? Yes, absolutely. But we, again, with the perfectionism, like we don't want to get on our phones because there's no makeup on that day, or we stuttered too many times. We don't want to start the podcast because we don't have the ring light yet, and so we can't do
Yeah.
the video. It's like, who cares? Just do it,
Yeah.
right? Because I swear the best thing that I ever did to go from, laid off to where I'm at today was truly so much messy action. Just, I
Yeah.
didn't wait, I just did it.
Well, and I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. So, what I always tell, whether it's my clients or those who take like online courses or things like that, is keep it as simple as you need to. I have a little ring light, and then I have this. This is my favorite thing ever. It's a Loom Cube. This is a video conferencing light. It has a suction cup in the back. So wherever, if I'm in a coffee shop, I just stick this on the back of my laptop and turn it on, and it makes everything beautiful. I just want somebody to follow me around with it. So yeah, like this one little light, which I think was like $50. That's all I need. That's all I need. I can use a mic. I don't want to use a mic. I've got them in the drawers in front of me, but the fewer things you plug in are the fewer things that can go wrong. And as long as you're in a room that sounds pretty good, and I'll be honest with you, I have been paid to do voiceovers that I have done on my phone in my closet, because the closet has all these clothes around it. It's perfect acoustics. And I just do this. It sounded better than using a mic. So, I mean, you can do whatever you need to do. You can do whatever it is you need to do with or without the amount of equipment. Look, and I know to paint with too broad a brush, but guys specifically love the bells and whistles. We want all the equipment. I want the big lights, and I want the mics, and I want the stand, and you can do all that. And that stuff's awesome. But honestly, as long as you have a phone, you can pretty much do 90% of everything. The audio on the phone, the video on an iPhone, you can shoot it in 4K. Like there's not much you can't do with a really good phone.
Did you ever shoot a package on your phone?
Absolutely.
Same.
I shoot videos for clients on my phone. Like I do all kinds of stuff. In fact, my phone shot video better than the cameras that we were given as MMJ. So like, and they were easier to use too. The only thing you got to worry about, of course, is audio and that sort of thing. But that's what $50 mic, and in some cases a $20 mic can do pretty simply.
I agree. Is there anything else that I didn't mention related to just getting comfortable on camera in relation to these coaches building their businesses and learning how to market themselves? Anything that I didn't ask you?
Yeah, I would just say the more the merrier. And we've talked about reps, and I think that's the most important thing. Don't overthink it. It's just like anyone who starts to shoot reels or anything like that. You start thinking, okay, I need this grand idea to shoot. No, it can literally be one little nugget of information, and you can make an entire video about it. And that you can use that example for everything else. So don't overthink it, just do it. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get. And if you want to, not post every single thing you do, go back and look at it, make sure it looks okay. That's great. My other suggestion is put it in your stories. Then it's gone in 24 hours and nobody knows it's there after that. And then it's just like kind of a little stair step to get to whether it's a video that's permanently on your feed or on your YouTube channel, whatever you have. And just remember that if your goal is to get good information out there, that's what you should focus on, is that information, and not so much the aesthetics of, oh, the background looks bad, or I said the wrong word, or I messed up. And that's the other thing I'll say is, if you mess up, just own it and move on. Unless it's something egregious, just, say, oh, I said 24 and I meant 25. That's all right. We're going to move on. It's okay. And this is not, this is not life and death, where you're helping people. And as long as your intentions are to do that, I think that that's what people are going to take away from your videos.
I think that's all perfect. The only little tiny tidbit that I think might be helpful too is, now that Instagram in particular has that archive feature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take some time to go back and just see how far you've come, because
That's a great point.
memories, whew, We thought Facebook memories are bad. When I get the Facebook memories that come up, I immediately, even as somebody that did TV, when I was really promoting my own business, that felt drastically different, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, I can promote other stories and other people, but it felt weird to do that with me and what I was doing. And so you can clearly see just a change in confidence, right, in what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. And I think some of you coaches listening, give yourself some credit, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
if you're comparing your day 30 to someone's day 3000, that's already setting you up for failure too.
The other part of it is you don't have to be on camera to be on camera. It can just be your voice. Like eventually if you want to really make that connection, you probably should. People follow people. They don't follow organizations. They want to know. That's why local news is still there. That's why, you being on camera is so important. And I'm sure that's what you tell them. But at the same time, if it's going to make you comfortable every once in a while to just, have your voice on camera and you're showing something else, if that's the step you need to take to get to be on camera to feel more comfortable, then that's great. Or, the old live reporter trick, which is be on camera for like this long and then move over to video immediately and come back at the end and say, thanks for joining me. See you later. So it's super easy to do that. So understand it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
I appreciate this, Kathrine. Thank you so much. It's been
Thank
really
you.
fun. And I'm excited to chat with you honestly after this now that I've met you. So I appreciate this. I will link your Instagram below if any of you guys want to follow Kathrine. And thanks for hanging out with me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.